Right, so that's on a record. So I hope. Okay, I'm Kate Floss, and today David Higgs, a very famous person who's been doing a lot of videos lately. He does his videos in around about 10-minute blocks, and he explains all of the legal system dating back several hundred years, and he goes through it very slowly and puts it in a way that people like you and me that are not so bright about these things can understand in a better way and get some kind of I don't know, relief from all of the chaos that's going on in our Anglo-speaking nations. The places in the world that are having the most troubles at the moment are England, Scotland, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and America. And what I was looking at is what's going on in these countries is that for me, I went back in history and looked at some things, and then I was thinking, how can we battle? And I discovered a lot of things. One of the things that I've been learning about is this tenancy. And then as I went back, for New Zealand, I know, and Canada and America, during the time of 1835, so in 1835, over in Scotland, so David Higgs and also my old videos as well went back to the time of around about 1200. If you start at the time of the Magna Carta, and you move through the time, and there were certain religions were kicked out of England, and we won't go into too much details here. But in Scotland, around about 1830, there was a thing called the Declaration of Arbroath, was made by Robert the Bruce, a king called Robert the Bruce, and he was a Jacobite king. And then his group, the Jacobite kings, believed in the divine right of kings, that you were born to it and appointed by the Catholic Church. We have to go all the way back to Germany, because you need to go to the source, and the source of most of English, Scottish, Irish peoples is Germany. And Germany, as you know, had Martin Luther of Germany, who stood up against the church, and he did his 95 theses, translated the Latin text into I think it was 15 other languages he translated. And when that came about, then it got translated also into English. When the people that didn't want to be under the doctrines of the Jewish or the Catholic or the Islamic biblical texts or laws, where all law comes from, they came up as Protestants or Protestants. Now, that in itself split into dozens upon dozens of other religious sects. Can't say that without saying sex, but I'm not saying sex, I'm saying sects.
Sure now.
So they split into dozens of religions because they suddenly were able to set up churches that were not of the three main faiths. So they had Methodist churches and Mormon churches, or whatever the churches, all the churches that they had. But the actual original Protestant people from the 30 Years' War of Germany, those actual people just didn't want to be under any religious laws at all. They wanted to go back to being Adam and Eve. And so they wanted to be just the natural man walking on the land, not under any of their church laws, because they were all Gentiles and those kinds of things. So the 30 Years' War over in Germany, those people were being hung by the dozens in the street and having their tongues cut out and being boiled alive and having all sorts of contraptions and torture devices put on them for speaking against any of those religions. Now, those three religions, as you know, went over to England, Scotland, Ireland, and then you had it's always been a Catholic, Protestant war that's been going on for thousands of years, but I wouldn't call it Catholic, Protestant. I would simply call it religion, people that want to have the whole world under their respective religious laws, and people that don't want to be under any of those kinds of laws. So they call it Catholic Protestant, but it could be Jewish Protestant, it could even be Methodist Protestant, it could be, any one of those. So this battle ensued, and millions of people moved over into England. Well, the English and the Scottish and the Irish brought those people over to combat the two religions then, which was Catholic and Jewish, that had taken over all of their lands. What they had found was is that the Jewish religion had bought up all the lands and they owned almost the entirety of England. So their kings were appointed, and the Jacobite king, getting back to Robert the Bruce, who was a Jacobite king, appointed by the church, but through birth, through divine right of kingship. And then, of course, going way further along, where we got 1688, where we brought in William and Mary, who were constitutional kings and queens, and who could be removed from their throne by us at any time. And now at that time, Robert the Bruce had a thing called the Declaration of Arbroath, which was not really a declaration. It was just a letter to the Catholic Church saying that, asking the Catholics over in France or over there somewhere to come and assist them to fight against the people and keep control of the country. Well, now you've got to jump over to New Zealand. And this is what I'm trying to do, is connect our countries up, because we are all connected from one root of the tree. So over in New Zealand, around about that same time, 1835, apparently they had a thing called the Declaration of Independence. And you can mirror the two countries. Well, those three countries in New Zealand, you can mirror them. The people on these lands, as you know, in Canada, you've got the people on your lands. And then the English people, the Scottish people, and the Irish people were all born to the land, naturally to the land, the allodial land. And all the Protestant people that were shipped in became tenants. And they all had a tenancy agreement, which was the 1688, I call it the Will and Mary. It was never supposed to be called a Bill of Rights, because it was not a bill, it was a will, and I call it the Will of Jesus. And so that it was the will of Jesus. People are going to call me crazy, but I say that Jesus already came back in 1688 with his will for us. And the main point of that will is that it says on there the right to petition for our rights and liberties, and that we would have the right to enter the court call the parliamentary, so see, everything that is passed in Parliament is called a bill. Bills, 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 bills. It follows the will of the people. The will of the people is, oh, we want to have a new bridge, or we want to have a highway, or we want to have a school. And the Parliament just signs off the bill, and this bill is given back to the people through their taxes and everything to pay for. But we have been given certain documents, ancient documents, where we can go to the court and we can challenge that bill at any time. And so that can come under excessive taxes, misappropriation of our money, as in the Will and Mary, excessive bail, all of these things, forfeiture of our properties. So this is all in our will. And what had happened was in the 1800s, the people in America, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, they had no law, because the reason why they had no written law is because they didn't have a written language. And so they were no different from the birds and the bees, really, under God, and the land was innately theirs, and they were born of the land, and the land was born of them. And because the British law was not allowed to go into their country because they were the sovereign owners of their country, they had to set up an elaborate system through the first ships that were sent. And those first, so one of the laws of the Will and Mary is that no foreigners can govern over us. And this is why all of our parliaments, you don't see, or should not see, any native people in our parliaments, because the tenancy agreement was that we would be able to govern ourselves, and that it's just like when you have a piece of property, right? I'll go and show you the things in a minute, and I'll just give you this bit of background, but I'm only giving it in a rudimentary form. And when I show you all the things, you'll look at them, and you might be able to untangle what I'm trying to express to you in the best way I know how. So the land, when you think about a tenancy agreement, the land belongs innately to the allodial holder, who is the first man, and then the tenants come in, and wherever you're born to, that is where your piece of earth is. And then when you move from that piece of earth onto another soul's piece of earth, you can become a tenant on that land, but you can never own that allodial land, because it belongs to that man of God that was already planted there. So what we got was, we got a tenancy agreement which was in perpetuity. And I'm going to show you in a minute how they're trying to undo that perpetual tenancy agreement, and they've moved in a secondary tenancy. And the second tenancy is repugnant to our first tenancy. And they have created laws in their second tenancy to prevent us from using our innate right to challenge bills and doctrines that are forced upon us. They have blocked this mechanism that was given to us, which came on the ships. So I'll show you the documents that I've got and just kind of swim around here and see if I can, oh, I can't move that. So,
now that's a lot to unpack. Of course, when I'm dealing with things, and you and I have discussed just prior to the video of how I come in at the matter and how you are coming in the matter. Now, if I understand you correctly, I just want to get a synopsis. Is you're seeking the original tenancy that was constituted through Will and Mary, and that is being overreached by the current tenancy agreement, which I would probably guess since 1925 and the Law on Property Acts, which moved all property under a trust for sale scheme, to which, as you notice, that's how our money system changed from, gold back and so forth, and it changed into exchange of notes, promissory notes, which entails your right to intercourse and trade resources within the agreement of the tenant of the trust. So essentially, what we're doing under this agreement, this new tenancy that I believe that you are speaking to, is we don't own anything. We are assumed owners, and we only hold those interests for the benefit of another, which would probably, would be that subject that you were speaking about with the first tenant rights. So we essentially we are assumed owners, or as quasi trustees who have a responsibility to hold whatever it is that is we classify as property, and then use that property, but use that property with the idea that we're not there to destroy it or wreck it. We're in fact trading everything under the trust for sale, and we're just using promissory notes in order to do that. No one under the trust for sale owns allodium or allodium. They are tenants, as you've already described, and we only have rights to the use of all the resources that are upon the land as a tenant, just like a tenant landlord agreement. Same idea. You have, control of that estate while you're in tenancy, but the primary interest is not controlled by you. You still have rules and obligations in order to perform under that tenancy. So I think that's what you're alluding to. So, do you want to go on from there?
well, over in New Zealand, what is happening over there is that they have added a second name to our country. And so the second tenancy is functioning within that name. And the first tenancy is functioning within the first name. Because having a name of the country, because land that's not mapped, and land that's, because having a name, we were subjects because God has no name and we had no name either. It's just like the entity that's in the jungle that has never been discovered. Nobody's ever seen it, but we know that they exist. If it's never been named, it only exists under God. It doesn't exist on the earthly plane. And so also the original man was not called man. It had no name. It just existed under God. When they wanted to bring mankind onto the earthly plane, we were all simply subjects and had no name. Now, subject does not mean a subject of anything. If you look at grammar and the way that English is designed, all things must be named by a noun, names, places, and things. And if it's not named, it doesn't exist on the earthly plane. It only exists in the heavenly realm, because we can't speak to that which we can't name on the earthly plane. so that when we have an animal that's never been named and it's never been seen, it exists, but it doesn't exist in our mind because it doesn't have a name. And so we started out as subjects, and that's why I'm talking about going back to my subject status now. So that's the same as countries. In the original godly realm, countries never had names, and that country that was not named didn't exist on the earthly plane, though of course it did exist on the heavenly plane. And so New Zealand was one of the last countries to be named, and when it was mapped and it was named New Zealand, that's what brought it into existence on the earthly plane, and then could be subjected to or go into the commercial businesses to function within the world. And this is a little bit like, no, I won't go into that there. So they created a new name for the country in around about 1855, this name called Aotearoa. And so now they've got two legal systems in New Zealand. If you look around the countries, they've got two flags, sometimes three flags. And in around about the year 2000, they gave each of the native tribes a flag of their own. And the flag holds the governance of the country or that area. And when the Anglo ships were sent, they basically, in a rudimentary term, roped off the area of land that the natives could, within the walking distance, the radius, and they said, so that land remained in its pure allodial title and was held by each of those kings of each of those tribes. And the area that was not roped off was given for settlement. And the settlement became the human shields to stop the religious entities who had already invaded the countries to take them over. Those religious entities started taking over all the lands, just like they had done in Germany and all of Europe, just like they had done in England and Scotland and Ireland and been fought off. That same thing was occurring in our Anglo-speaking countries. So we were sent in as human shields to become their armies so that they could remain living in their natural state in their heavenly realm under Almighty God. So what happened was, in 2016 or around about that time, they decided to allow to give these areas back and allow those native people to accept new tenants onto those areas that remain in its allodial form. And they gave each of them the right to sell that tenancy to various different instruments. Now, America was, except for 6 states of America became Protestant German states. Then all the other states, so America, the land belonged to the Indians, and England was in negotiations with the Indians to do a similar thing to what they did in New Zealand. But the American people didn't want to hold a tenancy. Okay, I don't want to go into that too much, but all I will say is this: if you go and look at their Declaration of Independence, what it says there, it starts out with unalienable rights. And so, or unalienable, and it tells that it got the alien of England and threw them out, and then they gave themselves inalienable right because they were alien to the soil, and the Indians were the innate owners of all of that. I see you want to say something there for a minute. Oh, I can't hear you, David. Your microphone's off.
That's right, I didn't mute it. Yeah, you sort of closed it in at the end, and when I was going to say something, you didn't reach that point yet about who really had the true title. Again, all these titles didn't exist. The native didn't, the Indian didn't have the title in the first place. It's English law that brought in the concept of titles in order to create that division. Now, of course, they have a separate interest altogether, which would be equivalent to a common law interest or a legal interest held primarily in the monarchy. It's not transferred over to government. Government takes care of the equitable interest or equitable benefits derived from the legal right, which is the legal is held in a trust and managed by trustees, to which then those parties would then have an equitable. So when U.S. said that their statute of independence, they were saying that they're going to run their own laws, but according to equity, and then create the common or customary laws within that realm under an equitable interest, because no one as a group or as parliament or as a government could control the common law right, because common law rights are individual or life interests. They have to go through a life originally, you or I or anyone else. So that's how the common law is set up. It has to go through a life and through laws of inheritance. So what the U.S. primarily got as a government got the right to create their own laws according to the rights of use, which is the equitable use from the legal title, still held in the monarchy. They didn't completely separate. They can't completely separate because because the land primarily belongs to us as the people, not as a group. We're just saying as a class of people. As an individual, the land belongs us inherently according to law, to which then governments and proprietorships like as such use therefrom.
Yes, and those governments are subject to, in the ancient laws, anyways, yes, so that all happened, and then in around about 19, I'll just, I want to show you some of the documents, I think I'll go to there, and then I'll come back to talking about, I want to tell you about LexisNexis, but I just want to tell you what they've done in New Zealand. So in New Zealand, they've set up a new tenancy, and that tenancy involves multiple tenancy. They have sold tenancies to various different, so they've sold some to Saudi Arabia, some tenancies sit in the UN, many of the tenancies have been sold to America, and that went into the Stock Exchange of America. Previously, their entire tenancy was held only by England, and anyone that entered New Zealand had to pledge the oath to the Queen, which made them a subject. And as you know, as a subject, they were never permitted ever to deal in allodial land, purchase allodial land, or even settle on allodial land that is owned by the natives. They weren't permitted to do it. This subject status does not apply to Asians, Saudi Arabians, Muslims, Jews, and all Indonesians, those countries. None of them are subjected to the subject status under the Queen. The only ones under the Queen are Anglo people, or people born, not even people born actually to their country, because it goes back to 1846. Wherever your ancestor was in 1846 of your two parents, that is the kind of the construct that your generations are under. With it is, I know nobody wants to be under it, but that's what we are kind of under. And so New Zealand.
Well, let me just interject there. The law of domicile is according to origin, birth, or choice. That is involuntary, and is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's making sure that when you are a full age to act, you have a time spent of when that interest began to which until you reach 20, 21 years of age, in order to vest that interest. So it is there to protect you, and the government, which I was speaking to other people, the government is the true protector of that interest and makes your parents guardians of you, who don't have more rights than the government. The government has more rights over the child than you do as a parent, because you are now agreeing to be a guardian as a citizen, which is a quasi-trustee, based on the government's need in order to use that interest that's held in your name in trust. So all really what's happening, the law of domicile, this secures your right of well, let's say right of ownership of an interest at the moment that you are born. And that's what they use all of their or they channel all their laws through, is through that interest. And through the law of domicile, it ensures that you have that right. You can trace it back to the moment that you were born. And of course, we already know that they're not recording you, they're recording the event of that interest when it first became available for the government to use.
And not everybody is under the same trust agreement. So Asians and Muslims and Jews are all under a different one. And Protestants, which are not under any of the religions, come under the 1688 will. And so not everybody's, and so our tenancy was always based upon people coming in and agreeing to go under that will and the agreements of that will. But recently they've changed that, and they have allowed different tenancies to enter and remain under their construct of what they have. So if you're a Muslim, then you come under all the Muslims' agreement, and then if you're in whatever, wherever you are. So, and if you don't come under any of those, then you can go into the UN one of being a stateless person. And so there's many, many different instruments, many different constructs for a tenancy agreement, because that's what they mean when they're talking about multicultural. They're talking about multiple tenancy agreements all going on in one country, whereas previously we only had one, which was the native people, and one tenancy agreement and the laws of that one. And I'll just, before I go to show you my documents to show you what's happening, because I don't actually know much, I'll just make sure that this is recording, because I've only recorded it on a specific screen. So I'll just